Hi, this is Terry Ryder from hotspotting.com.au. We've just published the new edition of our Top 5 Regional Queensland's Hotspots report. A regular inclusion in that report has been and continues to be the Sunshine Coast, one of the strongest and most compelling markets anywhere in Australia. You probably haven't heard too much about it because of mainstream media's ongoing obsession with talking about what's happening in Sydney and Melbourne, auction clearance rates there where the prices are bottoming out and rising again, what's happening in the two biggest cities. In the meantime, many of the strongest, most rising markets, the ones with that should have the most appeal for property investors because they offer affordability, better rental yields, and right now, good prospects for growth. Those markets very often are found in regional Australia. I've talked quite a lot in recent weeks and months about regional Victoria, regional New South Wales, and increasingly I've been discussing the prospects in regional Queensland because we're seeing a growing number of locations in regional Queensland starting to get on a growth path as their local economy improves. Now, Sunshine Coast is a market that I haven't discussed in this time slot for over a year, and having previously featured it in our National Top 10 Best Buys report going back then, it continues to feature in that report, and I don't see it exiting any of our major reports anytime soon because it's very much a growth economy giving rise to a growth property market, and it's going to be a long-term factor. The Sunshine Coast, which is about 40 minutes from where I'm currently sitting. I've lived pretty close to the Sunshine Coast for quite some time, and I know that region well. But also I know the local economy and the local property market particularly well because I've recently completed a very major research report, an in-depth report on this market and this economy for a major client. And my belief that this is one of the most compelling markets in the country is even stronger than it was before. The Sunshine Coast is very much an economy in transition. It has previously been hampered by the fact that it's been a tourism-based economy, and tourism-based economies very often don't produce long-term sustainable growth in their local property markets. Tourism is a pretty volatile and fickle industry. The reason why the Sunshine Coast has changed very much for the better is that the economy has been diversified and broadened and strengthened. A lot of that's come from proactive action by the local Sunshine Coast Regional Council, business leaders. There's a massive amount happening. Infrastructure spending relative to the size of the city is massive. My figures show that the infrastructure spend on the Sunshine Coast, which is a regional city of about 350,000 people, is more than many of our capital cities. It's certainly more than Darwin, certainly more than Canberra, certainly more than Hobart. In fact, I think it's more than those three cities combined. It is very much an amazing economic story. There's a new medical precinct, a $5 billion precinct that's still a work in progress, although the major component, the $2 billion Sunshine Coast University Hospital, is now in place and it's been up and running for a couple of years. But that's created a whole new precinct, a whole new industry, in fact, for the Sunshine Coast, helping the strengthening and broadening of the economy. There's a lot more happening. The international airport is undergoing an upgrade, and when that upgrade is finished, the Sunshine Coast will have an international airport. The university, which has been an important part of the economy of the Sunshine Coast, continues to grow and expand. There is two major upgrades to the Bruce Highway, which runs along the western edge of the Sunshine Coast region. Both of those are billion-dollar projects. There have recently been upgrades to, for example, Sunshine Plaza, the largest shopping centre on the Sunshine Coast, $400 million upgrade. That kind of thing is happening increasingly on the Sunshine Coast. But the biggest single thing long term is the new Maroochydore CBD. It's a unique project in that nowhere else in Australia is a major city of either a capital city or a regional city building a CBD for itself from the ground up. 53 hectares have become available. It used to be a golf course right in the centre of Maroochydore, which is the most central of the Sunshine Coast coastal suburbs. the golf course has been relocated. 53 hectares has become available for development, and they're building a CBD, which is going to include office buildings, hotels, convention centre, residential, retail, water features, a stop on the future proposed light rail system for the Sunshine Coast, and a whole lot more. And the first buildings are now starting construction. So it's a real project. It's not just a proposal, it's underway. The first buildings have been approved and work is starting, and that's going to evolve as a multi-billion-dollar project over the next 10, 15 or more years. So a lot happening. And out of all of that, is a very strong property market. In particular, we're seeing very, very big growth in prices at the top end of the Sunshine Coast market. And I think that's a direct consequence of the new infrastructure. The new hospital precinct, for example, has brought a whole lot of new people to the Sunshine Coast to live and work. Many of them are very well paid people. And that's created increased demand at the top end. The Noosa market, after 10 fairly ordinary years, in the last 2 years has risen very strongly. We've seen in some of those markets in the northern part of the Sunshine Coast coastal strip, up around Noosa, places like Sunshine Beach, we've seen median price growth in excess of 20% in 12 months, and that's ongoing. So we've seen a big rise in sales activity, and that's led to price growth on the Sunshine Coast. I expect it to be a long-term factor because many of the forces that's creating this growth are really only getting started. A lot has already happened on the Sunshine Coast, but there's a whole lot more still to come. It's at the beginnings of an evolution from being a tourism economy to being a much broader economy, a real regional city. Subsea cable, the international broadband network, where the Sunshine Coast is going to have the fastest and strongest internet links to Asia from anywhere on the east coast of Australia. That's going to be very significant. Couple that with the new CBD, the new international airport status, the new medical precinct. Suddenly we're talking about a city not only of national importance but international importance, and I really believe that to be true. So it's an economy that's creating a very strong and vibrant and rising property market, and it's one that I think is worthy of consideration by property investors who are looking for areas that provide affordable entry prices and really good prospects for long-term growth. So it features once again in the top 5 regional Queensland hotspots report, the new edition we're publishing this week. So if you're interested in finding out more, get yourself a copy of that report. Top 5 regional Queensland hotspots includes 4 other locations with good growth prospects as well around regional Queensland, which is starting to become a serious contender nationwide amongst markets that are rising, and continuing the trend that we've seen for the last 2 years, in which most of the compelling growth markets in Australian real estate to be found outside the capital cities in the regions. That's it for now. Terry Ryder from hotspotting.com.au signing off. We'll do it again same time next week. It's Hotspot of the Week. Bye for now.